Princessa stood in the great throne room of the Empire and wished she could disappear. She had wished this many times before. Today, she wished it more than ever. They were a proud species. They stood tall on two legs, covered in scales that shimmered like jewels. Their heads were crowned with crests of colorful feathers that fanned out when they felt strong emotions. To them, beauty was everything. A person's worth was measured by how brightly their scales reflected light, how magnificent their crest appeared, how gracefully they moved through the halls of power. By these standards, A was worthless. Her scales did not shimmer. They were dull and matte, absorbing light instead of reflecting it. Where other glowed like living gemstones, she seemed to swallow the brightness around her. Her crest, which should have been a magnificent fan of azure feathers, grew thin and uneven. Some feathers were missing entirely. The royal doctors had examined her since childhood. They called it a genetic mistake. The courtiers whispered darker words when they thought she could not hear. Cursed, broken, shameful. King loved his daughter, but love could not change politics, and politics in the empire demanded that royal children marry well. For 15 years, the king had searched for a suitable match for her. For 15 years, every potential suitor had found polite excuses to decline. Today was supposed to be different. The Collective, a powerful neighboring civilization, had sent a delegation seeking a marriage alliance. Their prince needed a bride. They needed the Collective's military support. It should have been a perfect arrangement. Lord the Ambassador had arrived with great ceremony. He was tall even by standards, with scales of deep purple that shifted to gold when the light touched them. His crest was magnificent, spreading wide like a peacock's tail. He moved through the palace as if he already owned it. When King presented his daughter, I had kept her eyes forward. She had learned long ago not to hope. Hope only made the disappointment worse. Lord had looked at her. His crest had flattened against his skull in disgust. He had not even tried to hide his reaction. "Your Majesty," he had announced in a voice loud enough for every courtier to hear, "your child is overly unattractive to wed. We came expecting radiance befitting our prince. This would be an insult to our bloodline." The words had echoed through the throne room. I had heard gasps, whispers, even a few poorly hidden laughs. Her father's guards had stepped forward, hands on their weapons. The king's scales had flushed dark with anger. But I had simply turned and walked away. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her cry. She went to the only place she had ever felt safe. The engineering wing of the palace was far from the glittering halls where courtiers gathered. It was filled with machines, tools, and the comfortable hum of working equipment. Here, no one cared about the light her scales did not reflect. The machines worked the same whether she was beautiful or not. I had discovered her love for engineering as a child. While other young nobles learned dancing and poetry, she had taken apart her toys to see how they worked. While they practiced the art of conversation, she had studied power systems and mechanical design. Her tutors had been horrified. Her father had been confused, but he had allowed her this one escape from a world that had no place for her. Now she sat among her machines and let herself feel the weight of another rejection. It was not the first. It would not be the last, but something about today felt final. The words had been spoken in front of everyone. There would be no pretending anymore. The entire empire would know that even a desperate foreign prince would not accept her. 3 days passed. I did not leave the engineering wing. Servants brought her food, which she barely touched. She worked on a broken atmospheric processor, finding comfort in problems that had solutions. On the 4th day, something unexpected happened. A strange ship appeared in space. It was unlike anything the Empire had seen before. The design was blocky and practical, lacking the elegant curves that engineers favored. It moved clumsily, clearly damaged, and sent out distress signals in an unknown language. They had never encountered humans before. No one in this part of the galaxy had. The Terran vessel had suffered a catastrophic engine failure while exploring far from their home territory. They had limped to the nearest inhabited world, hopping for help. King, eager for distraction from the embarrassment of the failed marriage negotiation, welcomed the strange visitors. The humans were odd-looking creatures. They had no scales, no crests, no natural beauty by standards. Their skin was soft and came in various shades of brown and pink. They had hair instead of feathers, growing from the tops of their heads in messy patches. They were shorter than and moved without grace. But they were also friendly, curious, and clearly intelligent. They needed repairs to their ship, and they were willing to trade technology and knowledge in exchange for help. The king ordered his engineers to assist the humans, but the palace engineers were artists, not mechanics. They designed beautiful systems but had little experience with crude repairs. Someone mentioned that Princess spent her time in the engineering wing. Perhaps she could help. That was how Chief Engineer Cole found himself standing in the doorway of a cluttered workshop, watching a princess with dull scales and a thin crest work on a machine with obvious expertise. Was 53 years old. His hair had turned gray at the temples. His hands were rough with calluses from decades of work. His face was weathered from years of ship life, and his eyes had the tired look of a man who had seen too many broken engines and not enough sleep. He was not handsome by human standards, let alone by the standards of aliens who valued shimmering scales. But he knew engineering, and he knew skill when he saw it. The princess was working on an atmospheric processor. Her clawed fingers moved with precision, adjusting components and testing connections. She had modified the standard design noticed, improved it, made it more efficient. An official tried to announce him, tried to tell the princess that she should not be seen doing manual labor in front of a foreign guest. She dismissed him without looking up. "If the human needs technical assistance," she said, "I am the most qualified person here. Leave us." Watched her work in silence for several minutes. Finally, he spoke. "That modification to the coolant system," he said, "that's beautiful work." The princess froze. Her hands stopped moving. Slowly, she turned to look at the strange alien standing in her workshop. In her entire life, no one had ever used that word to describe anything about her. The weeks that followed were unlike anything I had experienced. For the first time in her life, someone wanted to spend time with her, not out of duty, not out of pity. Cole simply appeared at her workshop each morning, ready to work. The Terran ship needed extensive repairs. Its engine had nearly torn itself apart during the accident. Human technology was different from systems in almost every way. Where they built elegant machines that worked in perfect harmony, humans built rough systems held together with backup parts and emergency patches. It was ugly by standards. It was also surprisingly effective. Taught about human engineering philosophy. Humans did not trust perfection. They expected things to break. So they built their machines with multiple backup systems, with parts that could be replaced quickly, with simple designs that anyone could repair. "We call it redundancy," explained one afternoon, showing her the inside of the damaged engine. "Everything important has 2 or 3 copies. If one fails, another takes over." I found this approach strange but fascinating. "That seems wasteful," she said. "Why not simply build it correctly the first time?" Laughed. It was a rough barking sound that startled her the first time she heard it. Because nothing works correctly forever. The universe is constantly trying to kill us. We just try to stay one step ahead. In return, I taught about crystalline technology. The Empire's power systems used specially grown crystals that could store and direct energy with incredible precision. The crystals required careful calibration, but when properly maintained, they were far more efficient than anything humans had developed. "This is remarkable," said, examining a crystal matrix through a magnifying lens. "The molecular structure is perfect. How do you grow them like this?" "It takes years of careful work," I explained. "Each crystal must be grown in specific conditions. The slightest variation ruins the entire batch." Nodded slowly. Beautiful but fragile. What happens if one breaks during a voyage? The system fails. No backup. Backup crystals would require duplicate calibration. The cost and time would be enormous. The human made a face that I had learned meant he was troubled. That's a vulnerability. One unlucky impact and your whole ship goes dead. They argued constantly. Thought technology was overcomplicated. A thought human technology was embarrassingly crude. They disagreed about power routing, about structural design, about the proper way to organize a toolkit. Their debates echoed through the engineering wing at all hours. But they were the debates of equals, colleagues, perhaps even friends. I had never had a friend before. One evening, after a particularly long argument about engine shielding, sat down heavily on a workbench. His face was tired but content. He had a drink in his hand that I had reluctantly learned to prepare. Humans called it coffee. It was bitter, dark, and contained chemicals that seemed designed to prevent sleep. "You know what I like about you?" asked. I tensed. This was usually when people said something cruel, when they reminded her of what she lacked. She braced herself. "You're honest," continued. "You don't agree with me just to be polite. You tell me when my ideas are stupid, and you're usually right." He took a sip of his coffee. "That's rare. Most people just tell you what you want to hear." Something strange happened inside A's chest. It took her a moment to identify the feeling. It was warmth. It was happiness. It was the unfamiliar sensation of being valued. "Your ideas are frequently stupid," she said, hiding her emotion behind her usual sharp tone. "Your species designed a hyperdrive held together with adhesive strips. Hey, that adhesive strip technology has been refined over 300 years. It's very sophisticated adhesive." Grinned at her. "Besides, our stupid ship crossed 400 light years. By accident. Still counts." Word of their unusual partnership spread through the palace. Courtiers whispered about the princess who preferred the company of ugly aliens to her own kind. Lord, who had remained at court hopping to salvage some form of trade agreement, made pointed comments about standards and dignity. King grew concerned. The situation was becoming a scandal. His daughter spending her days with a foreign engineer was unseemly. It needed to end. He summoned to the throne room. The human arrived still wearing his work clothes, oil stains on his sleeves. He did not seem embarrassed. He simply stood before the alien king with the quiet confidence of a man who had faced harder things than political disapproval. "You have been spending much time with my daughter," the king said. "Yes, your majesty. She's been helping with our repairs. She's incredibly skilled." "The repairs are nearly complete, I understand. Your ship will be ready to depart soon." Nodded. Something shifted in his expression. He seemed to be making a decision. "Your majesty," he said slowly, "I have a request." The king raised his crest slightly. "Speak." "I would like your permission to court the princess." Silence fell over the throne room. Courtiers froze mid-movement. Guards exchanged confused glances. Even the king seemed unable to process what he had heard. "You wish to court her?" The king's voice was strange. "For what purpose?" "Marriage," said simply. "Partnership, whatever you call it here. I want to spend my life with her." Lord stepped forward, his scales flushed with anger. "This is absurd. Human, have you actually looked at her? By any civilized standard of beauty, she is." "I've spent 3 weeks looking at her," interrupted. His voice was calm but firm. "I've watched her rebuild a hyperdrive motivator from scrap parts. I've seen her calculate trajectory adjustments in her head faster than our computers can manage. I've listened to her explain crystalline theory until 3 in the morning because she was excited and couldn't stop talking." He paused, meeting the king's eyes directly. "Where I come from, that's beautiful." The throne room erupted into chaos. Courtiers shouted over each other. Lord protested loudly about insults and impossibilities. Guards moved closer, uncertain whether they should intervene. But King was silent. He was looking at the strange alien who had just said something no had ever said about his daughter. And in the back of the room, hidden behind a pillar where she had come to observe the confrontation, Princess felt something she had abandoned long ago. Hoping. Lord was not a stupid being. He understood politics very well. He understood that a marriage between the royal family and these new humans would create an alliance. He understood that this alliance would make the collective less important. He understood that he could not let this happen. He also understood the ancient laws of the empire, laws that had not been used in generations but still held power. 3 days after the human engineer made his shocking request, Lord stood before the throne and invoked the challenge of worth. "The human claims the princess has value," declared, his voice carrying to every corner of the throne room. "Let him prove it. Let him demonstrate that she and his entire species are worthy of alliance with the great empire." The courtiers murmured with excitement. The challenge of worth was an ancient tradition. Long ago, when royal marriages were contested, the competing parties would face trials to prove their value. The challenges usually involved displays of beauty, artistic skill, or social grace. They were designed to showcase the refined qualities that they valued most. They were designed for people like Lord, not for dull-scaled princesses or rough-handed engineers. King's expression was troubled. He could not refuse the challenge without insulting ancient law, but he knew that any traditional challenge would favor overwhelmingly. "The human has the right to select the arena of challenge," the king said carefully. "This is also ancient law." Smiled. It did not matter what arena the human chose. Art, music, dance, poetry, beauty, social standing, wealth, military power. The collective exceeded these strange, soft-skinned creatures in every category that mattered. Stood alone in the center of the throne room. He was still wearing his engineer's clothes. He looked out of place among the glittering courtiers, like a stone dropped among jewels. But his voice was steady when he spoke. "The Empire has a problem," he said. "The collective has a problem. Every civilization in this region of space has the same problem. The Cascade Nebula." A ripple of unease passed through the crowd. The Cascade Nebula was not something people discussed casually. It was a region of space where the normal rules did not apply. Energy storms swept through it without pattern or warning. Ships that entered the nebula were torn apart by forces their shields could not resist. For centuries, the nebula had been declared impassable. On the other side of the cascade lay valuable resources, unexplored territory, and faster trade routes. Everyone wanted access. No one could survive the crossing. "Princess and I will design a vessel capable of crossing the Cascade Nebula," declared. "If we succeed, you will have proof of our worth. The princess's engineering skill and human technology working together to solve a problem that no one else has solved." He paused, looking directly at Lord. "If we fail, then we remove ourselves from your concerns permanently. You won't have to worry about ugly princesses or primitive humans anymore." Lord's crest rose with surprise, then flattened with satisfaction. The human was offering suicide. The Cascade Nebula had killed thousands of ships over the centuries. No amount of engineering skill could change the basic physics of those deadly energy storms. "This challenge is acceptable," said smoothly. "I look forward to the Empire being freed from this embarrassing situation." King wanted to refuse. He wanted to protect his daughter from this impossible task. But when he looked at her, standing at the edge of the throne room, he saw something in her eyes that made him hesitate. She was not afraid, she was eager. For the first time in years, his daughter looked alive. "The challenge is accepted," the king said heavily. "You have 1 year to prepare." They did not need a year, they needed 6 months. Called his entire crew to help. 12 humans in total, engineers and technicians who had crossed the galaxy in their battered ship. They set up operations in the palace engineering wing, filling it with tools, materials, and the smell of coffee that never seemed to fade. A worked harder than she had ever worked in her life. She designed a new kind of shielding system. Crystalline technology was elegant but fragile. Human technology was robust but crude. She combined them. Her new shield matrix used crystals arranged in overlapping patterns. If one crystal failed, others would compensate automatically. The matrix could recalibrate itself in response to changing energy conditions. It was beautiful and redundant at the same time. Built the framework around her shields. He used human principles of modular construction. Every component could be replaced quickly. Every system had backups. The structure was ugly by standards, full of exposed conduits and mechanical joints, but it was strong. "We're building a very strange ship," one of the human engineers observed. "We're building a ship that will survive," replied. "Pretty can wait." They argued constantly, just like before. Thought some of the human backup systems were wasteful. Thought some of her crystal arrangements were unnecessarily complex. They debated, compromised, and rebuilt sections multiple times. But they also worked together in a way that neither had experienced before. A's precision complemented practicality. His experience anticipated problems that her theories missed. Her innovations solved challenges that his conventional approaches could not. They named their ship the Reflected Light. It was a private joke. A's scales absorbed light. Ship would carry her through the most dangerous region of space ever known. Together, they would reflect something that had nothing to do with surface brightness. On the day of departure, the court gathered to watch. Most expected to witness a tragedy. Lord had already prepared speeches about the sad but inevitable failure of inferior beings who reached beyond their station. King embraced his daughter before she boarded. "You do not have to do this," he whispered. "Let the human go alone, prove his own worth, not yours." A looked at her father with eyes that had finally found peace. "He is proving my worth," she said, "and I will not let him do it without me." She boarded the Reflected Light. The strange hybrid vessel rose from the palace grounds. It was ugly and beautiful at once. It carried one human, and the impossible hope of two species working together. The Cascade Nebula waited. The Cascade Nebula was more beautiful and more terrible than I had imagined. She watched through the viewport as the reflected light approached the boundary where normal space ended and chaos began. Colors she had no names for swirled through the darkness. Great curtains of energy rippled like fabric in wind, shifting from purple to green to blinding white. Lightning arced between invisible points, traveling distances that should have taken light years in mere seconds. It was magnificent. It was deadly. "Beginning approach," said from the pilot's seat. His voice was calm, the voice of a man who had faced many dangerous situations and survived through careful preparation. "Shield status." A checked her instruments. The crystalline matrix hummed with readiness. Every crystal was calibrated. Every backup system was online. Shields at full capacity. All redundancy systems active. The reflected light crossed the boundary. Immediately, the universe tried to kill them. The first energy wave hit like a physical blow. The ship shuddered violently. Alarms screamed. A watched her shield reading spike as the crystalline matrix absorbed power levels that would have vaporized any conventional vessel. "Shields holding," she reported, her claws dancing across the control panel. "Recalibrating for frequency shift." Another wave struck, then another. The energy inside the nebula had no pattern that they could predict. Each impact was different. Each required different shield adjustments. In a normal ship, a single would have been fatal. But A's overlapping crystal design allowed her to adapt in real time, shifting power between matrices as conditions changed. Fought with the controls. The reflected light was not a graceful ship. It moved like a stubborn animal, resisting the forces that tried to tear it apart. Human engineering had never been elegant, but it was persistent. Port thruster is struggling, announced, switching to backup. Backup active, a confirmed. Primary can be repaired in flight if needed. Let's hope it doesn't come to that. They flew deeper into the nebula. Hours passed. The attacks never stopped. Energy storms swept across their path without warning. Radiation spikes tested the shields constantly. The ship groaned and creaked but held together. On the second day, disaster struck. A massive energy discharge appeared directly in their path. There was no time to evade. I saw it coming on her instruments, a wall of destructive force that no shield could fully absorb. Brace for impact. The wave hit. 3 primary systems failed simultaneously. The lights flickered and died. Emergency power kicked in, bathing the cockpit in red warning light. I heard crystals shattering somewhere in the shield matrix. The sweet harmony of her carefully calibrated system turned to discordant noise. Report shouted. Primary shield matrix at 40%. We lost an entire crystal array. A's hands were already moving, rerouting power. Backup arrays compensating, but we cannot take another hit like that. Engine status. 2 of 3 main drives offline. Life support stable. Navigation is failing. They were blind, crippled, and trapped inside the most dangerous region of space known to exist. Was silent for a long moment. I could see him thinking, his weathered face tight with concentration. Then he stood and moved toward the engineering section. Where are you going? To fix the navigation system. That requires external access. You would have to go outside the ship. Grabbed a toolkit, then I go outside the ship. The radiation levels will kill you in minutes. Then I better work fast. He paused at the door, looking back at her. Keep us flying. I don't care how ugly the solution is, just keep us alive. He was gone before she could argue. I had never been so afraid. She watched his life signs on her monitor as he climbed outside the ship into the chaos of the nebula. She watched the radiation eating away at his protective suit. She listened to his breathing, rough and determined, as he worked on the damaged navigation array with hands that must have been shaking from exposure. She kept the ship flying. She abandoned elegance entirely. She rerouted power through systems that were never meant to carry it. She pushed crystals beyond their rated limits. She did things that would have horrified her teachers, that violated every principle of proper engineering. But she kept them alive. 8 minutes later, tumbled back through the airlock. His suit was scorched. His face was pale and sweating, but he was smiling. Navigation is back online, he gasped. Not pretty, but it works. You are an idiot, I said. Her voice was shaking. Got the job done. He collapsed into his seat. How are we doing? We are flying on backup systems held together by improvisation and desperate hope. By standards, this ship should not still exist. Laughed weakly. Sounds about right for a human vessel. They flew on. The third day was the worst. The energy storms intensified as they approached the center of the nebula. Ian took turns sleeping in short shifts, never both resting at the same time. They repaired systems while flying. They adapted to problems they had never anticipated. They survived through stubbornness and skill and refusal to accept defeat. On the 4th day, the chaos began to fade. I saw it first on her instruments. The energy readings were dropping. The radiation levels were stabilizing. The colors outside the viewport were becoming less violent, more gentle. She said softly, "Look." Ahead of them, the nebula ended. Beyond it lay clear space, filled with stars that no had ever seen from this angle. The other side. The unreachable territory that had tempted and killed explorers for centuries. The reflected light emerged from the Cascade Nebula, battered but intact. They had done it. activated the ship's communication system. The message would travel back through the nebula, carried by relay drones they had deployed during the crossing. It would reach space within hours. "This is the reflected light," he transmitted. "Chief Engineer Cole and Princess are reporting. We have successfully crossed the Cascade Nebula. Navigation data and shield frequencies are attached. The path is open." He looked at A. She looked back at him. They were both exhausted, injured, and covered in the grime of desperate repair work. Neither of them had ever been happier. "We should head back," A said. "We have a challenge to conclude." "And a wedding to plan," added. She did not argue with him. The return journey took 2 days. A piloted the reflected light back through the nebula using the data they had collected during the crossing. She found stable corridors through the chaos, paths where the energy storms were predictable enough to navigate. What had been impassable was now merely dangerous. When they emerged on the side, an entire fleet was waiting for them. Ships from every noble house had gathered to witness their return. News of their successful crossing had spread across the Empire within hours. The impossible had been achieved. The Cascade Nebula, which had blocked trade and exploration for centuries, was now open. Lord had quietly departed 2 days earlier. He had not left a message. King's ship was at the front of the fleet. The king himself stood at the viewport as the battered, reflected light approached. His daughter's vessel looked terrible. Scorch marks covered the hull. Entire sections were visibly damaged. Replacement panels had been welded on without any concern for appearance. It was the most beautiful ship the king had ever seen. The landing was a celebration. Crowds filled the palace grounds. Nobles who had ignored her entire life now competed to stand near her. Common citizens chanted her name. Engineers from across the empire begged for copies of the technical specifications. And a walk down the landing ramp together. They were both still wearing their work clothes, stained with oil and sweat. They both looked exhausted. They both looked proud. The king embraced his daughter in front of everyone. He did not care about dignity or royal protocol. His child had returned from the impossible. "You proved them all wrong," he whispered into her ear. "No," A replied. "We proved that they were measuring the wrong things." The wedding preparations began immediately. Traditional royal weddings took place in the great throne room, surrounded by glittering courtiers and elaborate decorations. A refused. "I fell in love in the engineering wing," she told the wedding planners. "I will be married there." The planners were horrified. The courtiers were scandalized. The king overruled all objections. The wedding ceremony was unlike anything the empire had seen. The engineering bay was cleaned but not decorated. Machines still hummed along the walls. Tools hung in their proper places. The smell of oil and electricity mixed with the scent of flowers that someone had thoughtfully provided. Wore his cleanest engineer's jumpsuit. He had washed it for the first time in months. Wore a simple gown that did not try to make her scales look brighter than they were. She looked exactly like herself, which was exactly what she wanted. The human crew served as witnesses. 12 engineers stood in a row, looking uncomfortable in formal positions but fiercely happy for their captain. Wedding ceremonies traditionally emphasized the beauty of the couple, with poetry about shimmering scales and magnificent crests. The priests had been forced to write entirely new verses. They spoke instead of worth proven through action, of brilliance that came from the mind rather than the surface. When it came time for the king to speak, he stepped forward with visible emotion. "For years," he admitted, "I believed my daughter was cursed. Her appearance was a tragedy to be hidden, a failure of our bloodline that I could never fix. I searched for anyone who would overlook her flaws and accept her despite them." He paused, looking at. "It took someone from another species entirely to teach me that I was looking for the wrong kind of light. I was so focused on surface reflection that I never saw what was shining underneath." The king took both of their hands, placing them together. This human did not overlook my daughter's flaws. He did not accept her despite them. He simply never saw them as flaws at all. He saw her clearly from the beginning, and what he saw was beautiful. His response was shorter, in the human fashion. Where I come from, we have a saying. It goes, "What matters is what's under the hood." It means that the surface of a thing is not important. What matters is how it works inside. He squeezed A's clawed hand gently. Your daughter has the most incredible mind I have ever encountered. She is brilliant, dedicated, creative, and stubborn in exactly the right ways. I'm just lucky that she is willing to share her life with me. The audience did not fully understand the human expression about hoods, but they understood the princess's smile as she looked at her husband. They understood the way he looked at her, as though she reflected all the light in the universe. The celebration continued long into the night. Humans taught to dance to strange, rhythmic music they called jazz, taught humans to appreciate the subtle flavors of crystalline wines. Engineers from both species gathered in corners to discuss the technical achievements of the Cascade Crossing, already planning improvements and refinements. The universe had changed. A path existed now where none had been before. Trade would flow through routes that saved months of travel. New territories would be explored. New alliances would form. And at the center of it all was a princess with dull scales and an engineer with rough hands, who had found in each other something that neither had expected. Years later, when Princessa served as the Empire's chief ambassador to the Terran Federation, she kept a small object on her desk. It was a strip of adhesive tape, the kind humans used to hold their ships together. She had framed it in crystalline glass. Visitors often asked about it. "It is a reminder," she would explain. "Humans have a philosophy. They believe that nothing needs to be perfect. They believe that anything can be fixed if you are stubborn enough. They believe that worth is not about how you look on the surface." She would touch the frame gently. They believe that sometimes the most beautiful solutions are the ones that nobody expects. In engineering schools across both civilizations, a new philosophy was taught. It combined elegance with human practicality. It valued both precision and redundancy, both beauty and function. Students learned that the best designs were often hybrids, mixing approaches that seemed incompatible until someone was brave enough to try. They called it the Cola Principle. But most people just called it hope. The message spread beyond engineering. It changed how they thought about worth and beauty. It changed how humans thought about elegance and perfection. Two civilizations learned from each other, grew closer, and built things together that neither could have built alone. All because one engineer looked at a princess that everyone else had dismissed and saw something beautiful. All because she looked back and saw the same thing in him. That is the nature of humanity. They see potential where others see failure. They find beauty where others find flaws. They build bridges across impossible spaces, using nothing but stubbornness and skill and the absolute refusal to accept that anything is truly impossible. The stars are vast and filled with wonders, but the greatest wonder of all might be this: that two beings from different worlds can look at each other and see not what is missing, but what is there. That is beautiful. That is human. And that is why, in the end, the human engineer asked for the princess's hand, even though everyone told him she was unworthy. He knew better. He always had.